Welcome to The Joyful Life, the podcast for finding true happiness in every aspect of your life through spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental health. I'm your host, Anthony LaJoy, and thanks for joining us for another episode of exploration into personal success. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Joyful Life podcast. This week we are changing it up a little bit. So this is Colin Householder.
How's it going?
And Colin has quite a bit of experience and has done a lot of study and research on social media, essentially, and patterns that we see. And it's interesting because having this medium, this platform of a podcast, and being very active on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube, it's funny that I'm talking about this topic because we still want to spread the word through social media, how bad social media can be.
Yeah, study is a nice way of putting it, I guess. But when it comes to social media, it's a tool that's very effective, the internet and social media, to communicate and to get ideas out. But the negative effects are apparent, and essentially everyone has probably had some form of experience with negative effects with social media. Mm-hmm. So I guess that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, talk a little bit about how it's affected our society, how it's kind of changed the culture, the feel of our everyday lives. That's good. So let's get kind of started into it. I guess so. We talked about a little bit about how off camera, off podcast, how social media can affect us in kind of a few ways. You know, there's the personal aspect, and then there's the cultural aspect, but there's the problems that it starts in both those areas. But then how do we fix those problems? So we're going to kind of address all three of those today. So this should be an interesting episode. Definitely something that I don't think I've talked about much yet at this point, so it's a little bit different idea this week, but I'm excited to talk to you about it. So let's kind of get started right into it. Let's take personal.
Yeah, so when I was breaking it down, when I was looking at this, I saw two major facets where social media really affects us as like a species. And there's the personal aspect, so like how you actually interact with social media and how social media actually changes you. But there's also the societal, cultural changes where it affect all of society, and how these trends will matter going forward. So when you're talking about the personal, I think some of the most apparent ones are how it affects your mental health and how it affects like addiction rates and such, and like your need for it. Because in the end, they've done studies. You get boosted endorphins when you're looking at this stuff. And it's designed in a way that you will continue looking at it as long as it can possibly keep you on it. So if you ever go on your Facebook app or your YouTube app or Reddit or whatever social media platform or all of them,
Right.
You know that they have like a constant scrolling feature, like when you try and get on there. And the reason they have that is so that you don't stop scrolling. Because every time you look at one of these, it has a longer chance of keeping you on the app, which is what the companies that produce these actually want.
Right.
So they're engineered in a way to like focus on the weaknesses that every person has, the endorphin boosts, and the desires that you have, and the constant need to see more and more, or not want to miss out on something. And because you have this constant scrolling feature, it's going to do that. Yeah,
I think the FOMO, we talk about, which is fear of missing out. That's what it stands for. That has been increased so much, like tenfold, by the social media platforms we have now. I mean, when you're scrolling through, you see, which of your friends are interested in an event. Mm-hmm. You immediately are interested, and kind of nosy, like, hey, what is this event? Like, I got to know more about it. You got to, look more into that because you don't want to miss out on what they're doing. And that's okay. That's not like a bad aspect, but you mentioned mental health, and even like emotional health. And when you get so involved on social media, that you are constantly, connected to your phone and having to check to see if you have any updates or if anyone commented on your status or liked your picture or anything. If you don't get as many likes as what you thought you were going to get, it's almost like this draining kind of, oh, people don't appreciate me or people don't like me, which is an emotional thing and it's a mental thing. And for some, especially the younger generation, I think, as kids, if it's like a 12 or 13-year-old kid and their friends aren't liking your stuff, that is then going to affect them in such a way that I think it can actually even turn into a physical ailment.
It is, and it doesn't just affect kids that way. We're all engineered in a way that you're gonna get these boosts in your brain if you're getting likes on your post or anything along these lines, because it's literally engineered to do that.
What's interesting is as an adult, if someone comments negatively on a post, I have this like, oh, you're such a bad person, like that's so mean, why would you say that, right? Mm-hmm. I can only imagine what a younger person in our generation, or well, not our generation, I guess technically the next generation, okay, the 12-year-olds and whatnot, who already have a Facebook account.
Yeah.
When their friends say something negative, their mind is so young, they aren't comfortable yet in who they are. They don't know exactly who they want to be just yet. So they're still trying to figure it out, right? And so for them to see something like that, you can see why that would be devastating in some situations. So like that's the whole cyberbullying idea.
Yeah. Oh, and it's been a serious problem. I mean, to the point that our own government is putting together programs to try and stop cyberbullying.
Yeah.
Just because it's become so prevalent and so problematic. Because while adults may be better at dealing with this stuff, no one is immune from negative feelings coming from social media and mean comments and anonymous trolls on the internet that are out there who specifically are trying to get rises out of people. And you can see it in suicide rates and things along these lines. Online bullying is being shown to have an actual effect on these stats. And that's a pretty serious topic.
Yeah. Loneliness too. Mm-hmm. If people aren't interacting with you on Facebook, what do you do? Or if your phone isn't blowing up with text, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my day? Mm-hmm. Right? That's a big problem. I think that people feel popular when they're getting contacted, but we got to change that idea.
Well, there was a study done. It was either the University of Maryland or Michigan. I can't remember exactly which one. Mm-hmm. And essentially, they studied anxiety levels, depression levels, loneliness levels, and FOMO was what they were focusing on. Mm-hmm. And they found at the end of their study that actually if you reduce the amount of time that you're on social media, you decreased your depression and your loneliness levels. On a causation level, they could actually link these together. So ironically, despite the fact that social media gives you the ability to reach out and talk to more people than you would normally get to in a normal day, it actually increases your loneliness levels and your depression levels and brings you down.
I believe it 100% because there's some days that I will shut off my phone or for a couple hours or something to have that same kind of just relief. When you don't have that in your life, so a couple days, we all forget our phones now and then at home, or we forget our wallet or whatever. When you do that, it's interesting. For the first hour or so, you feel this kind of sense of urgency, this sense of almost anxiety. Mm-hmm. But then once you just breathe and just let it out, all right, my phone is gone for today. What are we gonna do? Just focus on whatever your work is, or if you have your work day or whatever. But it ends up being a more relaxing day, I found, in those situations. So I believe that 100%. That's kind of cool. Also, they did a study, and people used to have an attention span. I want to say 5 minutes or something like that. Mm-hmm. That if you were going to pitch them for a marketing campaign or something, you had a 5-minute window to grab their attention.
Yeah,
it's now down to 7 seconds. That's insane.
It
It's
doesn't
because of that
surprise
constant swiping, right, on your phone. Like it's.
Well, they have to hook you immediately now.
Yeah.
Because you're only going to be looking at some of these, especially advertising and stuff, for only a few seconds, if that. It could be just a second. Yeah. So the goal is to hook you as fast as they possibly can, make it as interesting as they can, or overwhelm you with ads to the point that you literally can't do anything about it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, still in that personal category, how the social media constant connection that we have has changed. I guess this kind of branches a little bit over into cultural, but when you go out to, it could be a restaurant, a bar, it could be a networking event, anything. People feel gravitated to their phone, and it's like a safety blanket, right? I feel the same way. I do the same thing if I'm by myself and I was talking to somebody and then they walk away. I pull out my phone just to
scroll a little bit.
It's something, right? And it's something I'm trying to work on.
Everybody does.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit.
It's extremely common.
Like
if you go out to a restaurant, how often do you see entire families at a table all with their phones out? How many times do you spend time with friends and, when there's a lull in the conversation, a few people have their phones out? I have a game night here every once in a while, and though my group is pretty good about it, it still happens occasionally that it'll slow the night down when somebody pulls out their phone and isn't really paying attention. And this is common. We all do it because it's literally an addiction. We are all to some form and degree desirous of the information, or it's not always that you want likes. Like some of us may not be people that post a lot or put a bunch of pictures on the internet or something like that. But sometimes, like you said, it's the security. It's, hey, nothing's going on right now. I'm by myself. I'm uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. I'm going to pull out my phone just so that I don't look like I'm not doing anything, or so that I'm comfortable so I am doing something. It could be any of these reasons.
And it's ironic because when you pull out your phone and you're sitting there, whether you're looking through your photo gallery or on Facebook or texting somebody, it doesn't matter. If you are on your phone, people are less likely to approach you because they look at you and go, oh, they're busy. Because they're not going to come over and look over your shoulder and say, oh, no. They're texting their mom about, I don't know, the best wall color for their house. That's not important. I can talk to them. They're gonna assume oh, maybe they're a salesperson and they're making an important meeting set up or something, so they kind of stay away.
Yeah, you'll be less approachable.
For sure.
You're doing your own thing.
Yeah.
Someone would literally have to interrupt you.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. Dude, here's a great idea. They should open up, I don't know who they is, I'm just going to say they, should open up a bar where you have to check your phone at the door. Like in the Old West when you had to check your gun at the door. You have to check your phone at the door, and you're how when you go through the airport and the TSA, their little scanner thing.
They scan your phone.
Yeah, they actually scan in to see if you have a phone. That way, you have the choice to leave it in your car, or you can check it at the door. But yeah, they scan you for electronics. You're not allowed any electronics to come in there, and it's like it's known to be a networking bar.
It forces you to actually have communication with these other people, the other patrons, or something along those lines.
That's an idea. The Joyful Life Bar. Should I do it? Let me know. I think that's an option.
There you go.
Yeah.
I watched a TED Talk on this. Not that
Love TED Talk.
Where they basically talked about how your phone and social media as an extension of your phone is affecting you in these ways, because it can even damage your sleep cycles and such.
Yes.
If you have your phone next to your bed, the glows at night cause sleeping problems. If the first thing you're doing before you go to sleep is being on your social media, or when you wake up is being on your social media, these can have negative effects on how your day pans out or how you look back on that particular day. It's not all bad. There's not everything about social media or internet is a bad thing, but how we use it and how we treat it might require more self-awareness and restraint and discipline, just because we're very freeform about it as a society right now, where we don't really take it into account too much. We all kind of take advantage of it. and we'll just do kind of whatever we want all the time, which is what it's designed to do because that's how it makes money. But it's not necessarily healthy for us as individuals.
Not at all. Not at all. I was actually talking to a friend the other night, and we were discussing, this upcoming episode and talking about, some of the points we're going to hit. And they made an interesting point that back, I don't know, maybe not so long ago, let's say like in the 40s and the 50s, even more recently, but before the age of nice, cell phones and the smartphones and that we have, if you lost like a family member, something tragic happened in your life, your neighbors would be very apt just to come over with a pot of food or something and say, hey, they would just drop in, hey, just wanted to check on you. I know it's been a tough time here. Like I made you a pot of food. I remember my mother used to do that when, a friend would, have like a family member pass or something. She'd say, they're in a time of grief. Like they're not gonna eat well if they eat at all because they don't feel like cooking and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So she'd bring them a pot of food and check in on them, every few days. Just kind of, you give them your space, but it's that true caring about your fellow man that I think has been lost, at least in some part, with the modern age of technology. But that interpersonal communication, that interpersonal connection, is something that I think is really important. And if we lose that completely as a culture, I think that's a sad thing, man.
So this kind of brings you into the societal differences.
Let's get into that.
And how the changes have, how social media and internet connections are changing society as a whole, not just our individual brains. And like you're talking about is the community damages that this potentially has. And this is not something that was started by the internet or social media, but it's something that the internet and social media have kind of laid up the gasoline on top of.
Interesting.
If you look at communities, especially in the United States today, how our communities formed early on is a little different than how communities in other countries formed. They're not as communal based, especially out here, just because America spread so quickly, especially in the 50s, and with the advent of cars for essentially every family, we spread out a lot faster when you're not in rural areas, if you're not just looking at rural areas. So
right.
You look at like suburban areas or city areas where the majority of the population lives, like these areas have spread out a lot more, meaning there's not as much of a communal feeling. So like if you live in this town, Brandon, like how much do you actually care about Brandon as a town? Well, probably not that much. You're not feeling some attachment to the town as like an entity, like a civic entity. Mm-hmm. But the internet has increased this significantly, this feeling of not being connected directly to your local community, just because now every issue you're reading about is a national or global issue as opposed to a local issue. If you talk to people about how much they know about politics and you try and ask them what they know about their local politics, how much does the average person know about can they even name their local politicians? Probably not very much.
That's a good point.
And the internet has increased this. Now there's benefits to this, as the internet gives us access to seeing people's problems or seeing things that we should change on a global scale and a national scale and bring these issues to the forefront. But they also muddy the waters heavily because the issues that are going to directly affect you at your house and the problems that your family needs to deal with are not necessarily the same as these national issues and these global issues.
Yeah.
So if you want to advocate for you, your family, your community, your neighbors, which is how these ideas came into fruition, especially here in our country. The idea was that the local communities would work together and advocate for what they need.
Yeah.
And now with the community, like how many of us know our neighbors? How many of your neighbors do you know? Like you might know your next door neighbor, but do you know your neighbor down the street?
Yeah.
Do you know the guy in the cul-de-sac behind? Like you may not know this. So how do you advocate for these people when you don't have connections to them? We don't spend time in community centers as much because we don't have community centers. Churches used to be the center of communities in earlier centuries, which would help bring the entire community together. So you would actually converse with all of these people. You don't do that these days.
Yeah.
And there's not been a real replacement for that in our lifestyles today. And the internet has expanded that pretty significantly.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, it's funny that you talk about churches as a congregation and stuff, because they're, and I don't particularly remember this, but older family members would say oftentimes in a small town, a lot of my family members are from small town America, and they would mention, hey, if there was such a meeting, there were only a couple of public buildings in town. Mm-hmm. And the church is one of those places that could hold enough people. So oftentimes the church or the school, like in a schoolroom or whatever, would be like the meeting place.
Yeah.
Right. For public announcements, for public, hey, this is what needs to be done. We need to raise money for this and this. So it's funny you mentioned that churches would be a congregational place. Congregational, huh? Pun intended.
Nice.
Actually not intended. I didn't mean to do that. But where I was going with that now. It was so funny.
Well, churches were centers of communities, especially in times before our modern era, and mm-hmm. rural communities especially. Mm-hmm. And in the modern day, we still have churches, and there's still a fair amount of church attendance, but churches don't act in the same way as a community center, especially in very diverse cities where not everybody goes to church.
Right.
And so in our very secularized society, we haven't really filled out like a community center that engages all of the community.
That's true.
And this is an issue that I'm not sure is being dealt with.
Not really.
There's not a lot of people that are doing their best to try and find a way to bring entire communities together, to advocate together.
You know what I think are super cool are festivals of any kind. Here in Florida, in Plant City nearby, we have a strawberry festival, right? Mm-hmm. There's the fair, and that's pretty much everywhere you go. There's a county fair, there's a state fair, what have you. Those types of things are social setting for folks to get together and hang out and get to know their neighbors a little bit. One thing that I think is awesome, and in Ohio, where I'm from, there's about a couple hours from where I live, there's a big Amish community. And the Amish have it down to a science, man. Because they've really kind of cut out, at least for the most part, it's kind of hard to avoid it completely, but they've cut out modernized, motors and that sort of thing for the most part.
That's what they're known for.
They are known for that. But they still do the old-fashioned barn raising, man.
Yep.
And all the families, they bring their picnic lunches, right? They're hanging out, the kids are playing, the dads are working, the moms are, setting out all the food and stuff, and it's, they have a good time. Mm-hmm. And back in pioneer days, they would do the same type thing, then they'd bring out the fiddles and whatnot, and they'd have a little dance and all that stuff. And that's community, in my opinion, that's community at its finest.
Yeah.
That is you hanging out with your neighbor, getting to know your neighbor, and then at that point you say, hey, when's the next barn raising, right? So it's neighbors helping neighbors.
Yeah.
And gives the families time to socialize as well. Because back then, they lived 10 miles from each other, and the only way was by horse and buggy. So they probably camped at the barn raising, because that's a long way to drive home after a long day's work. But I don't know. I didn't live back then. I would love to go back for a day in that setting and just take it in, man, how that worked out.
Yeah.
I think that'd be awesome.
For a day or a week, like a visit.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I would love it.
We used to have block parties in my neighborhood when I was a kid.
Great idea.
That multiple of the families would put together. Everybody would bring food and drink, and they would hang out, and the kids would all play. It's not nearly as common today.
Nope.
And part of that is because my parents don't know the neighbors as much, and I don't know the neighbors as much. But at that time, it's really cool because when you're getting together like that and the families are spending time, you're not just laughing and joking and drinking and eating and all the things that you normally do at a block party. Somebody might mention, hey, this is something that's going on in my life and it's not good. And I could use help with it. Mm-hmm. And neighbors who are meeting with each other and conversing and having fun are suddenly like, hey, I care about you. You're my neighbor. You're telling me about something I would never hear about any other time. I can help you with that. And this is how these relationships grow and expand and how communities work together. And in a day and age where we're very, very connected, we're not quite as connected to the communities that we really need to advocate. Like, the people that you need to help and the people that we want to help aren't just people that are all around the world. Not that these are bad things or things that we should be shooting for, but a lot of the times that how issues are going to affect you at home and your community are where you need to start the changes, because that's where you can build out ideas to a larger audience once communities are working together about it. And it's way harder to do that now because we aren't connected on a communal basis.
You know what's interesting? When I'm out in public, this is something I challenge myself on, because it's something that I challenge the entire The Joyful Life Nation to do. So if I don't do it myself, I'm kind of a hypocrite, right? But I found that it brings me more joy is when I'm out in a public setting, be that at the store or going for a run or whatever. When you pass people, I try to make eye contact with them. And most folks, they keep their eyes averted. They don't want to look at you. It's kind of weird. But if they feel you looking at them, they will look up, and you've got to meet them with this genuine smile, or otherwise they feel creeped out or something. It's kind of weird. But meet them with a genuine smile and having an audible, "Hey, how are you?" Instead of just like a nod and pursing your lips.
Yeah.
And it's funny because they look at you and kind of have this almost kind of unsure look on their face. But when you meet them with a genuine smile and you say an audible hello, their face, for the most part, brightens up, and they're like, "Oh, hi." They don't, you read in their body language and everything, they did not expect you to be friendly. And it's so mind-boggling to me. I'm like, why? We're social beings. We're supposed to interact with each other and help each other out. I don't know. It's interesting.
It's kind of off topic. Not completely, though. That what you just told me reminds me of a photographer that went around and took pictures of people and just asked people if they could take their picture, and then immediately told them that they were beautiful and took another picture of them right after they told them that. And you could see the change. And it's such a vast change between the original picture where they're not asked to do anything and the picture where they've actually complimented the person. It has nothing to do with what we're really talking about too much, but I thought it was a really cool campaign.
That's, you know what? So I had a suggestion actually from one of the listeners that suggested that I go to a mall or something and have a microphone and a camera, right? And just kind of give them a 10-second, "Hey, I've got this podcast and doing a social setting. Would you mind answering a couple questions or something?" And just have an interaction. You can ask same questions right down the line and talk to maybe 10 people or so. So I might do that as an episode.
There you go.
I think that'd be pretty neat. And get all kinds of people from all walks of life and just ask them what brings them happiness in their life. I think it'd be very interesting. So I think I'm going to do that. But that's kind of similar to the photographer.
Yeah.
It's a cool thing.
So pulling it back probably to the internet and social media effects, one of the other things that kind of expands from not having a local community or as much connection to your local community is that ideas that are traditionally considered bad ideas or conspiracy theory or things like this have an ability to grow on social media platforms and internet platforms in a way that they haven't ever been able to grow before. So when you're not interacting with everyday people all the time about normal ideas and such, and you can find 100,000, a million people that share a kooky idea like flat Earth or something. You can find people on the internet now that they have conventions for these things now. And when that's going on, and you can find so many people that will agree with these ideas, it makes it way harder to get out of that thought bubble and get out of this idea that, hey, I found all these people that agree with me on whatever this idea is. There's no need to challenge it at all. And it's led to demonstrable changes in communities just because you can find high growth in flat earthers or really bad extremist ideas. Terrorism grew through internet extremism and such. And they use these platforms to try and find people and to radicalize them or to change people's minds and then get you sucked into these thought bubbles where you can't escape it because it's literally all you're ever reading or hearing. And they give you all the arguments of how to argue against people that are bringing up rational ideas. And because you found these communities and you feel at home in them, especially if you're kind of an outcast or somewhat, and it's increased radicalization, which this is something that social media and internet have done in a way that hasn't ever been done to the same extreme as we're currently seeing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of view, and I agree with it. And I think the way we kind of have to fight that is, spreading good news, spreading good word through the same mediums for hopefully combating that. But this might kind of transition into how we combat the issues in our personal lives and our cultural lives, because that third aspect is what do you do about it, right? Mm-hmm. And one point I want to touch on, I think is a kind of good transition, is that doing like a Facebook argument, right, doesn't change a thing. And this is something I used to do in college because I'm very passionate about my beliefs. And someone would make a post about, I don't know, something, pick a topic, something that I disagreed with. And I would say, actually, no, that's not the case because blah, 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 blah. And you say whatever you're going to say. And then they hit you back with their points. And then I hit them with my points. And some of these conversations get downright nasty.
Yeah.
Downright nasty. And it is to the point that I've decided I will never, ever, ever again post anything on social media about a personal opinion or anything, because here's the deal. It's not that I'm not proud of it. It's not that I don't feel passionate about it. But there's always going to be someone who disagrees. And you will never change that person on social media anyway. Because instantly people start using really this hateful terminology. They start calling names. You start saying, "Oh, if that's how you feel, then unfriend me now." It's like, really? So you're gonna
I'm gonna block you.
Yeah, like you're gonna alienate a person for one thought process they have, as opposed to all these other good things that you guys have created together. Right? We're friends on a personal level, but now you want to defriend me on Facebook and cut me out of your life because I disagree with you on one point. Like that's not being an adult, in my opinion. But it creates this sense of this emotional, like, oh my gosh, I'm losing a friend right now. I'm losing this argument. Oh, they just called me a name or whatever. And I think that's not good for us as human beings on a mental, emotional, and then eventually even a physical level.
You're right.
Cause that illness.
It's interesting because we did miss this one part. Is the dehumanization of people that think differently than you that the internet causes?
Right, yeah.
And these Facebook arguments, like you said, they can, or whatever your media platform you're arguing on, can kind of devolve into name calling and treating each other poorly. And part of this is that not only do we get stuck in our thought bubbles and our ideas where we don't see other ideas, it also teaches us just through repetition that whoever's thinking differently than you is bad.
Yeah.
And you have this idea that they are not just bad, but they're actively trying to be evil, and which is not correct in most circumstances. And what this leads to is a dehumanization of people that think differently than you. So people can't understand why you would think different because everything I've seen says this. And this person's arguing against this. Literally everything I'm looking about and everybody I'm talking to is saying this idea and this person has the gall to go against it. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. They're not a person. And then you'll treat them not like a person. Yeah. And it leads to, you can see this with the the trolling on the internet, where people actively try to provoke this reaction from people. They'll go in and they'll say whatever they want, and they're usually anonymous. It'll be in a YouTube comment or a Reddit post or on 4chan if you're unfortunate enough to find yourself on that website. And their whole goal is just to make people mad, because this reaction is very common. How many people here have heard or watched or seen or been a part of a Facebook argument over something, and how easy it is to trigger negative emotions off of something like that. And like you said, you don't even participate in anything along those lines now, or you actively made the decision not to. Which I would say is probably a good thing in most cases. Like self-control, self-discipline, being aware of how these things affect you when you're reading them, and understanding that these negative emotions that are being provoked by whatever you're witnessing is a bad thing, and that you don't need to react in an emotional way to it. I'm not necessarily agreeing that you should never have these conversations on these platforms. I do think that these platforms offer the ability to have these conversations in a much wider area with a wider audience, which can be good, but it requires approaching topics and discussions and debate in a very respectful way.
That's key.
Traditional debate.
Yeah, that's key.
Which is not how it's typically done, and most people are not truly equipped to do that, because formal debate and discussion is not something that is traditionally taught. So approaching these topics in a way in good faith, where you're trying to actually break down ideas and differences, is not how people approach them. If you read these Facebook arguments, you're seeing this constantly, where they just fail.
For sure. I'll happily have any conversation, any debate, any day of the week with someone in person. But I don't want to do it anymore on a social media platform, or if there is a good topic that, hey, there's a lot to be had here, I'll even invite the person sometime. Hey, we should talk about this sometime in person. I'd love to chat with you more about this in person, even over the phone or on a Facebook or on a Skype chat or something, because you can hear those vocal inflections, you can see facial reactions, and that says a lot, because you can say a very edgy comment, but a vocal inflection or a body language tells that other person subconsciously how you mean that comment. Right? And whereas on the printed word, it can come off as like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that.
How many text messages have you gotten where they misunderstood where the inflection really belonged? And so the entire way you read it is completely different than what it was intended.
It's funny because that's how things get taken out of context. So let's bridge now. What do we do about this? What are the go-tos for solving these problems, for humanizing ourselves again, and creating that social real culture?
A lot of it comes from discipline and self-awareness. I think that the internet and social media are tools. They're not necessarily good or bad. They don't have a moral connotation onto a piece of technology. But how we utilize them is what really matters. So if you reduce your amount of time that you're on these platforms, you will likely see a positive bump in your attitude, according to the studies. Making sure that you limit your time on these platforms and that you're aware of how these platforms are affecting you is extremely important in being knowledgeable about what their effects on your life are going to be. So limiting your time usage, understanding and going into these things, knowing that any profile that you see of another person is not an accurate representation of these people. These are how people decide to present themselves on the internet. And knowing that you yourself are also probably presenting yourself on an internet platform in a way that is different from how you actually are in real life. These are all super important to making sure that these have way less negative effects on your day-to-day life. try not to pull your phone out. Spend a day where you turn your phone off. Pick a day of the week where you won't have your phone on, and you won't be tempted to go to it because it's not on you.
Honestly, like a Saturday is a great time for that, because or whatever day you have off, right? For if you're like a nurse or something, maybe you have a Thursday off. Take like an off day that you don't need to say, well, I need my phone on me for business meetings and stuff, because that's true, and that's real, and I'm not going to ask you to do that. But yes, taking a day to turn it off. A couple of things, little helpful hints. I recently found this out. YouTube actually has, if you go in the settings, there's actually a timer. It reminds you, so you can set it for 10 minutes, or an hour, whatever you want. But I forget what the timer's called. It's called like a surfing reminder, whatever it is. They have a kind of interesting name for it. But YouTube has that option. It's built into the settings. You can set it for however long, and it will remind you, hey, you've reached time, get off. Which I think is cool.
Yeah.
Especially on that social media platform, like YouTube is cool saying, hey, no, like we're cool with you using less time. It's kind of a cool thing, I think, for them to do. Also, if on Facebook, we all have that friend who all they do is post controversial stuff. That's all they do, right? I have a couple of them. I'm not going to name any names. And you know what? I don't like them any less. But I found that when I see their controversial comments, if it makes me feel a certain way, if I want to fire something back at them, I go, man, I see these posts all the time. That's all my newsfeed is full of. You can go and unfollow that person, go to their profile. You can unfollow them without defriending them. So no one's feelings are hurt. If that's what they want to do, that's fine. They can do their thing. If that's not for you, you can unfollow that person. So there's 2 helpful hints. You can unfollow on Facebook, and you can set a timer on YouTube. And then if you're on Instagram or Facebook just scrolling, you can set your own timer on your phone. So
yeah,
I recommend that.
The study that they did where they showed the decrease in loneliness and depression basically was that they limited their social media exposure to 30 minutes a day and didn't go beyond that. And that's how they saw all of these drops in these different categories, these negative categories.
Yeah.
And it is nice that most of the apps are coming out with timers that will lock you out of the apps if you spend too long on them, so that you can put the timer on them. It's not that they're doing this out of like the goodness of their heart, because most people aren't going to utilize these things, so it's not a big loss to these organizations that put these on their apps.
Yeah.
But it is nice that they have the access to that, and that you can actually set it up that way. It's difficult. It would be really hard. I don't have those timers on my apps and probably should. But the limited exposure, the self-awareness, so you know when you're pulling your phone out just to scroll and being like, hey, maybe I shouldn't do this, putting it back in your pocket so that you can interact with people. Like these are, it's going to take like some mental fortitude where you actually like paying attention to what you're doing to combat it. Because we don't really know like how this is going to affect society over 15, 20 years, since it's so relatively new. And isn't studied super heavily either, from what I found. It is being studied, but it's hard to study the effects of social media because different cultures and different countries are affected differently. How much access you have to it is affected differently. Like it's a difficult place to study. So knowing that it can do good, for instance, you have a Facebook to spread the news of this podcast.
Right.
Which is extremely valuable to marketing, but knowing where it can also be problematic, where it can start to cause you negative harm and stuff, and knowing how much exposure you should really have. This is personal, and it's going to require some looking into yourself to figure out some introspection.
For sure. Yeah. No, I agree, man. That's all really good content. I hope you guys kind of enjoyed that as well. We're definitely getting to time here, so I think we'll wrap it up there. But everybody, this is all it's very, very important stuff. I think this is a very big prevalent issue in our society now. And Colin, I appreciate you coming on and talking about it, man. You've done a lot of research on this stuff, and it's good to hear your opinions on this stuff. Very valuable information. guys, if you want to talk more about it, definitely hit me up. Please share this video. Please share this this audio with your friends and family. It's good word to spread out there, and definitely take advantage of the timers and the different settings that these apps and these companies have for their stuff. It's something that I promise you will not be a regret. You will be happier. You will have a lighter mental and emotional state, and you will ultimately feel a lot happier and more fulfilled in your life. So until next time,
Cool. Thanks.
have a good day, man, and stay happy, stay humble, stay joyful.